analysis may involve a study outlining the demand for single-family units in Orange County. 2. An analysis that introduces market segmentation for the study of the supply and demand for a particular property type or commodity is typically the analysis process that most appraisers routinely perform for their assignments. An example of this segmented type of analysis may involve a study outlining the demand for 5 to 10-year-old single-family units in the northern part of Lenox Township in Orange County. Prior to initiating the analysis process, the appraiser must first decide who the typical buyer would be for the property being appraised. What are the needs and desires of the typical buyer relative to the property? What is the typical buyer's price range for this type of property in this neighborhood? Is the typical buyer for the subject property an investor, or will the buyer be looking to make this property their home? Is the typical buyer for this type of property single, divorced, or will this buyer already have a family? Is this the type of property that will be considered to be a primary permanent residence, or will this property be a second home for this typical buyer? Is this property in the step-up class relative to that starter home the buyers have outgrown? Who would be the typical buyer for this property? What does this typical buyer want in their new home? Are the buyers going to need space for a home office as they will be working from home? Is the office area separate and apart from the living portion of the home? Do the buyers want a yard that is already fenced for their children or pets? Does the typical buyer for this property desire a separate family room, or do they typically want a great room for the added family closeness? How many cars does the typical family for this property have? Is there enough garage space for those cars and the bicycles and lawnmower and all the other items that will end up there? Is the master bedroom big enough to accommodate their king-sized bed? Are the interior walls the right color? Is there enough room for a small garden or other landscaping ideas? We could go on and on when considering the wants and desires of the typical buyer. Keep in mind that some of these examples may be wants or needs while others are desirable, but not essential for the typical buyer of this property. Where is the typical buyer in terms of market affordability? The price range of properties may dictate the buyer's financial affordability for locating in this particular market area. Is this property at the high end of the neighborhood value range? Is the typical buyer willing to purchase properties at the high end of the neighborhood value range? If so, there may not be an opportunity for the property to appreciate in value. All buyers want their properties to appreciate, either through the action in the marketplace, or because of their improvements to the property. The appraiser's analysis will focus on all of the areas identified above, and assign a priority relative to the needs, capacity, and/or desires of the typical buyer for the type of property subject to the analysis process. After the information has been organized and analyzed, the appraiser will be able to determine the market trends and support the opinions based upon his or her interpretation of the market-derived information. The results of the analyses will allow the appraiser to make a determination of the highest and best use for the property being appraised. It is important to note that the appraiser must perform the necessary analysis to obtain enough information to make the highest and best use determination for the subject property. Housing at or near military installations in the United States as people will be transferred back to the States side cannot react as fast as the demand side. As a result, the market switches from a seller's market to a buyer's market. Properties will remain on the market for a longer period of time, and prices of homes will start to fall. There will be an oversupply of available housing, and no buyers forthcoming to purchase the oversupply. In other words, supply has outstripped the demand for the commodity. There is not enough demand for the product, and this will be reflected in the marketplace. Balance: is there enough of supply and demand to satisfy the prevailing market? We have just given an example of an unbalanced situation in the market. If we were to change the preceding example and maintain the status quo with the military installation transferring some of their personnel to other locations and receiving an equal number of replacement personnel for those who transfer or leave the service for one reason or another, a balanced situation would be in effect for the people moving in and out. Incoming people will require housing and the social amenities associated with the relocation process. Moving can be traumatic for those directly affected. New schools for the children, new assignments for the military member, new friends to be made and lingering feelings for those friends left behind, new or different available housing to meet their needs, wants, and desires, a different standard of living for the new location, what type of housing is going to be affordable, and lest we forget, commuting distances to and from that affordable housing area. Ideally, the housing market will be slightly more abundant than the demand at any one time. We can visualize the market forces at work here to keep the values more or less stabilized and in check within the marketplace. There is enough supply to meet the demand. The demand is strong enough to take care of the existing supply. The market remains relatively stable. This type market has created a status of equilibrium. Change, market trends will identify the changes occurring in the marketplace as of the effective date of the appraisal. Using the first example of the closure of a military installation, we visualized the changing of the market. We have said the market changed from a seller's market to a buyer's market. As that market underwent change, the market registered a change in supply versus demand. At the same time, the market was trending downwards in terms of housing prices. Due to the oversupply of housing and no demand for that housing, the appraiser would perform the required analysis to reach the conclusion about the